"What is that, a parade gun?" someone jeered as Lyra Voss stepped onto the range, her rifle blazing crimson against the desert sun. Veterans smirked, rookies whispered, and bets piled high that she would fail before the first shot. But hours later, the storm raged. Wind howled, and every shooter before her had already broken. Then Lyra, with nothing but that red rifle and a promise carved deep into her heart, took aim at the impossible. 5,900 meters. One breath. One squeeze. The crack split the gale. Silence followed. The target rang, and when the storm whipped back her sleeve to reveal the mark of Project Helios, even the generals froze. Who was she really? The desert sun beat down mercilessly on the wide stretch of Fort Liberty's shooting range. Dust swirled with every gust of wind, carrying with it the metallic tang of gun oil and the smell of hot brass from warm rifles already tested that morning. 50 shooters had gathered, each representing either battlefield experience or the polish of competition halls. Veterans leaned casually on their rifles, scarred hands gripping weapons as if they were extensions of their bodies. Rookies, some with brand new jackets still stiff from lack of use, spoke in hushed whispers, eyes darting toward the decorated names among them. Into this atmosphere rolled a faded sedan that looked entirely out of place among the trucks, Humvees, and armored jeeps parked along the lot. The door opened slowly, deliberately. Out stepped Lyra Voss. At 27, she moved with calm precision, every gesture spare, no wasted energy. She pulled a plain, black rifle case from the trunk. No team logos, no flashy patches, just hardware worn by travel. For a moment, the buzz of conversation quieted, curiosity pulling at the edges of the gathering. Lyra's eyes swept the grounds, not in awe or intimidation, but in assessment. She noted the wind flags tugging in the breeze, the shimmer of heat rising off steel plates in the distance, and the subtle way each shooter had staked out their territory under canopies or benches. A young private at the registration table nodded stiffly. "Name and unit, ma'am." "Voss, Air Force," she said simply, sliding her ID across. The officer glanced at it, barely disguising his smirk. "Never heard of you." "Well, good luck. These guys chew up rookies before breakfast." 49, he added, scribbling her number on a slip. "Last in the firing order." Lyra accepted it without a flicker of reaction and made her way to the open benches. When she unlatched the case, the atmosphere shifted instantly. Gasps cut through the hum of conversation. Inside the case lay a sniper rifle, an AXMC, but its finish gleamed a bold, blazing crimson red. In the harsh sunlight, it looked almost aflame, as though dipped in fire. Laughter rippled through the crowd. One voice jeered loudly, "What is that, a parade gun?" Another chuckled, "Guess we're holding a fashion show today." Heads turned, grins wide, disbelief thick in the air. To many, rifles were sacred tools of war, defined by matte black or muted tan. This crimson rifle looked like rebellion, an insult to tradition. Pushing his way to the front came Marcus Hale, a man whose reputation already carried weight. His frame bore the signs of 3 combat tours, and his voice carried the authority of a teacher who had seen too many pretenders. Arms folded across his chest, he barked, "This ain't a car show, Lieutenant. War doesn't come in bright colors." Laughter erupted again, louder this time, emboldened by Hale's words. For them, the judgment was final. Lyra had already failed, but Lyra didn't so much as lift her eyes from the rifle. Calmly, she slid the bolt into place with smooth efficiency, locked the bipod, checked the scope, and chambered a test round. Her movements were textbook perfect, not a wasted gesture, not a moment of hesitation. With her free hand, she brushed a small pendant at her neck, a chip of red glass that caught the sun before disappearing again beneath her collar. By then, Major David Rourke, the range officer, stepped forward to announce the rules. Targets ranged from 700 meters out to the unprecedented 5,900. Competitors would shoot in reverse registration order, which meant Lyra would fire first at every stage. It was the cruelest setup possible for someone the crowd already doubted. As the order was called, Lyra carried her crimson rifle to the first station. The crowd leaned forward, waiting to see her crumble. "Shooter ready," Rourke called. Lyra dropped prone, her body aligned with the rifle like a machine built for one purpose. Cheek pressed to the stock. Breathing steady, she exhaled half a breath and squeezed. The crack echoed across the valley. A heartbeat later, ping! The metallic ring from the target at 700 meters sliced through the laughter like a blade. The spotter's voice carried over the sudden hush. Dead center. For a moment, no one moved. Veterans exchanged uncertain glances. Rookies stared wide-eyed. The same voices that mocked her now struggled to find words. Beginner's luck, someone muttered weakly. But the conviction was gone. Lyra calmly rechambered, her expression unchanged, as though the shot had been inevitable. She rose, packed her rifle with quiet efficiency, and returned to her bench. Marcus Hale folded his arms tighter, his eyes narrowing. Unlike the others, he didn't laugh anymore. Instead, he studied her, every movement, every calculation. Something about her stillness, her discipline, was too precise. He had seen it before, somewhere far from this range, and it unsettled him. The game had changed. The heat of the Nevada desert shifted as the morning wore on. But the storm building overhead was not only in the sky, it was inside the minds of the shooters at Fort Liberty. Lyra Voss had already silenced the first stage with a perfect center hit. The crowd of veterans and rookies, once so loud with laughter, now carried a nervous undercurrent. Every eye turned to her crimson rifle as though it carried a secret none of them yet understood. The line advanced to 1,000 meters, a distance that stripped away luck and demanded skill. Wind pulled at the range flags, dust spiraled across the ground, and the shimmer of heat distorted the steel target until it looked like a ghost dancing on the horizon. Lyra lay prone again, her cheek resting against the scarlet stock. She inhaled, her breathing steady but not the familiar three-count rhythm most shooters had been taught. Instead, she followed an unusual cadence. Shallow breaths, 5 in a row, then one deep inhale, followed by a pause that stretched longer than the others. It looked foreign, mechanical, almost surgical. The rifle barked. "Mari sur our," the ping followed. "Dead center," the spotter called, this time with hesitation, as if his own voice betrayed disbelief. The murmurs rippled across the line. 2 perfect shots in a row at distances where even veterans occasionally faltered. Some shifted uncomfortably. Others exchanged glances, their earlier smirks now brittle. Marcus Hale's jaw tightened. No rookie does that twice. He had spent years on battlefields, watching both talent and bravado crumble under pressure. This wasn't just precision, it was something else. He found himself replaying her breathing rhythm in his mind. It wasn't any technique he had seen in manuals or training schools. It was too deliberate, too strange. The third stage moved to 1,800 meters. At this distance, textbooks ended and instinct began to rule. Mirage waves danced above the sand. Air density shifted, carrying rounds away from their path. Even competition champions dreaded this distance, for it required a marriage of calculation and trust in one's senses. Lyra dropped prone. She adjusted her scope with quiet confidence, then scribbled into a waterproof notebook she carried at her side. The others noticed it. Pages filled not with simple range tables, but with dense formulas. Spin drift, Coriolis effect, barometric pressure, and wind shear angles. She whispered numbers under her breath as though reciting a language only she knew. Then she fired. The metallic ring came again. Another center hit. Now the murmurs were no longer dismissive. They carried weight, fear, awe, disbelief. 3 for 3, someone whispered. Marcus folded his arms across his chest, but his unease was growing. He leaned toward another veteran beside him. "That breathing, ever seen it before?" The man shook his head. "Not in any school I know." Marcus clenched his jaw. There was only one explanation. She wasn't who she said she was. As Lyra packed her rifle, she touched the pendant at her neck, a small chip of red glass, before sliding it back under her collar. The gesture was subtle, almost unnoticed, but to Marcus it felt like ritual. The line cycled again. Several shooters missed. A few clipped the edges of their targets. Marcus himself drilled a shot close to center, drawing nods from rookies who still clung to his authority. But when compared to Lyra's flawless precision, it seemed ordinary. By the time they advanced to 2,700 meters, whispers turned into open speculation. "No way this is luck." Nobody new shoots like that. She's hiding something. Marcus stayed silent, but his suspicion sharpened like a knife. He reached for his phone between turns, scrolling through databases he had collected over the years. Competition results, service records, deployment logs. Nothing. No Lyra Voss in official records tied to marksmanship. No mentions in competitions. It was as if she didn't exist. A ghost with a crimson rifle. When she fired again at 2,700 meters, the result was inevitable. Ping. Dead center. But this time, something else happened. In the bleachers, a wheelchair creaked. Colonel Samuel Drake, an old man many had long forgotten, leaned forward. His uniform had faded, his medals dulled, but his eyes still carried the weight of memory. He whispered almost to himself, "That's Helios breathing." The words, though quiet, carried like thunder to Marcus, who stood only a few feet away. His head turned sharply. "What did you say?" Drake's companion, confused, leaned closer. "Helios? What's that?" The old colonel shook his head as though he had revealed too much. "It shouldn't even be public," he muttered, his gaze locked on Lyra with an intensity that cut through the storm. Marcus's mind reeled. Helios. The name rang no bells in training manuals, but it carried the tone of something buried, classified, forbidden. He typed the word into his phone's search bar, but no record appeared. Nothing. Only silence where information should be. Meanwhile, Lyra returned to her bench, flipping her notebook again. She ran a hand across the ink-stained pages, numbers sprawling like constellations. She wasn't rattled by the crowd, nor by the whispers that grew louder. If anything, her composure deepened, her focus sharpening with every stage. The competition pressed forward, but it was no longer about trophies or recognition. The atmosphere had shifted. Marcus studied her, every movement, every breath. His pride, once steady, now trembled under the weight of what he was witnessing. He couldn't shake the thought. She's not here for medals. She's here for something else. And Colonel Drake's whisper haunted him like an echo he couldn't silence. Helios breathing. The air at Fort Liberty had shifted. What began as a competition filled with laughter, smirks, and confident wagers had turned into something else entirely. Whispers rode the desert wind, and even the veterans who once mocked Lyra Voss now fell into uneasy silence each time her crimson rifle touched the ground. She had already done what many considered impossible, flawless shots at 700, 1,000, and 1,800 meters, but the real test was only beginning. 2,700 meters, where textbooks end. The range stretched into a blur, 2,700 meters of distorted air and shifting mirages. Shooters who had once thrived at close range now floundered here. Some missed clean, others clipped steel barely enough to register. The wind curled strong and erratic, dragging sand across the valley like a living thing. Lyra lay prone. She opened her notebook once again, scribbling figures. The crowd leaned forward, straining to see formulas they couldn't understand. To them it looked like madness. Lines of numbers about barometric pressure, spin drift, density altitude. But to her it was language, a translation of chaos into precision. Her chest rose, 5 shallow breaths, then 1 long inhale, then stillness. Her finger curled. The crack tore across the range. Half a heartbeat later, ping, dead center. The spotter's voice broke with awe. Center mass, 2,700. Silence followed, heavier than applause. A few shooters shook their heads. One muttered, "No way this is real." But the evidence rang steel clear. When Marcus Hale fired his round, his shot was clean, respectable, on steel but off-center. For the first time in years, his reputation wasn't the brightest flame on the range, and he felt the shift like a knife under his ribs. 3,800 meters, the storm builds. By the time the line advanced to 3,800 meters, the desert sky had begun to churn. Clouds rolled in from the ridge, dragging cooler air, twisting the wind without warning. Flags snapped violently, and the smell of rain clung to the horizon. Most competitors failed outright. Bullets vanished into the storm, never touching steel. The crowd braced for disappointment, but Lyra, calm as stone, adjusted her bipod, shifted her shoulder, and wrote new equations in her notebook. Her pendant slipped free as she moved, a shard of red glass glinting under the stormlight. She touched it, whispered something no one could hear, then steadied her scope. The rifle barked. Another ping. Dead center. The storm had shifted, but her aim had not. Colonel Samuel Drake, from his wheelchair in the bleachers, leaned forward once again. His voice was low but firm. Helios, no doubt about it now. Marcus caught it, his stomach twisting. He clenched his jaw. Helios, a ghost program, a rumor whispered in combat zones, now bleeding into reality before his eyes. When his turn came, Marcus struck the outer ring. A hit, but no triumph. The applause was polite, and when he rose, he saw eyes already turning back toward Lyra. Respect had left him and gathered at her crimson rifle. 4,900 meters, silence before the storm. Only 6 competitors remained by the time the markers were pushed to 4,900 meters. The air was heavy, storm clouds pressing down on the valley. Wind-buffeted flags, snapping canvas overhead. The atmosphere felt like a countdown to something no one could predict. Lyra slid prone again, rain now beginning to spit across the range. Her sleeve slipped slightly as she settled, but she pulled it back into place without thought. Her breathing ritual began again, that strange cadence that unsettled every trained eye watching. The rifle cracked, the plate sang, dead center, and the silence afterward was total. For the first time in Fort Liberty's history, someone had struck 4,900 meters with perfection. Even the veterans who once scoffed now fell quiet. They weren't just watching a competitor anymore. They were watching something historic unfold. When Marcus fired, his bullet kissed the outer edge. Good enough to keep him alive in the contest, but not enough to reclaim what he had lost. The younger shooters still clapped for him, but their eyes betrayed the truth. They had a new standard, and it was crimson red. 5,900 meters. The impossible shot. The storm finally broke as the final round was called. Lightning split the horizon, rain slashed sideways, and the wind howled across the valley like a living beast. 3 shooters remained: Marcus Hale, Sergeant Doyle, and Lyra Voss. Doyle went first. His breathing was steady, his trigger smooth, but the storm bent his bullet wide. Miss Marcus stepped forward next. He fought the gale, adjusted windage with every ounce of skill he carried, and squeezed. His bullet struck out her ring. Extraordinary for the distance, but not enough to be remembered. Then came Lyra. The crimson rifle caught a glint of lightning as she lowered herself behind it. Her notebook lay open, ink bleeding under the rain, but she didn't need it now. The numbers were etched into her mind. She whispered them softly, her voice lost under the thunder. Her pendant swung free, clinking against the stock. 1 deep inhale, half exhale. The trigger broke. The crack split the gale. Seconds stretched, eternity folding into silence. Then, ping. Dead center. The spotter's voice trembled as he shouted, "Center mass, 5,900 meters." The range froze. For a heartbeat, no one breathed. Then the storm itself seemed to hold still, as if acknowledging what had just happened. As Lyra rose, the storm tore harder, pulling at her jacket. The sleeve whipped back, and for the first time everyone saw it, a dark tattoo on her forearm. Wings arched over a burning sun. Colonel Drake's voice, though barely a whisper, carried louder than any shout. "Project Helios." The soldiers around him stiffened. Even the generals standing at the edge of the command tent froze, their faces pale. Marcus Hale stared at the mark, realization slamming into him. He had heard whispers in Fallujah, stories traded in Helmand, legends of an experimental program that trained snipers beyond human limits. A program so secret, even its name was supposed to be erased. And yet here she stood, a woman they mocked, holding a crimson rifle, revealing the mark of something the world wasn't meant to see. The storm raged on, but the silence of the range was absolute. Who was Lyra Voss really? And why had Project Helios come to life in front of their eyes? The storm over Fort Liberty had not yet cleared when the call came. Rain still lashed the tents, soldiers still whispered about the mark on Lyra Voss's arm, when a runner burst from the command tent, breathless, soaked to the bone. "Message from Ops," he shouted above the wind. "Guardian team stranded on Alaska Ridge. Casualties confirmed. Enemy forces converging." Every head turned. Even General Adrian Lockhart's jaw tightened as he stepped forward. "How many?" he demanded. The runner swallowed hard. "2 wounded, sir. Time window for extraction. Less than 90 seconds." The murmurs swelled. Guardian Team was one of the most elite units deployed in northern operations. If they were pinned, the situation was dire. Lyra's hand instinctively gripped the red glass pendant at her neck. For the first time that day, her calm cracked. Her voice cut sharp. "Who's leading the team?" The runner hesitated, then answered. "Lieutenant Daniel Voss." "Major." The storm outside the range suddenly felt like nothing compared to the storm inside her chest. Daniel, her younger brother. Orders snapped into place. A transport bird was readied. Lyra and Marcus Hale were assigned as Overwatch support for the rescue. Marcus almost protested. Why her? But one look at General Lockhart silenced him. The decision wasn't up for debate. Within the hour, the Desert Storm was replaced by the roar of helicopter blades carrying them north. The transition was jarring, from sand to snow, from scorching heat to Arctic cold. By the time they landed at the edge of Alaska Ridge, night had fallen, and the blizzard had already swallowed the mountains. Snow whipped sideways in sheets, reducing visibility to almost nothing. The wind howled like a living predator, clawing at every exposed seam in their gear. The ground crunched with ice beneath every step, each one threatening to give way. Lyra pulled her cloak tight, crimson rifle wrapped in protective canvas, while Marcus cursed under his breath, wrestling with the storm. "Whiteout conditions," he growled, struggling to steady his scope. "This is suicide." "Not if we move fast," Lyra replied, her voice even, though her heart thundered. They climbed partway up the jagged slope, finding cover behind rocks half buried in snowdrifts. Through her high-powered optic, Lyra scanned the ridge. The storm blurred everything, but her trained eyes parsed the chaos. There, they emerged from the haze. Figures clustered near a cave mouth. 6 armed enemies, relaxed and unaware, their rifles slung as they joked and smoked. But it was the 2 leaders that caught her eye, circling higher on the ridge, scanning with binoculars, their posture alert. They were commanders, guiding the hunt for Guardian Team. And farther below, faint heat signatures flickered on her scope. Guardian soldiers, injured, trying to hold out. Marcus wiped frost from his optic, swearing. "I can barely see 10 feet, and you're telling me you've got IDs?" "I've got them," Lyra said. Her voice carried no hesitation. She whispered numbers again, adjusting for distance. 6,450 meters, 4,900, 4,300. Marcus turned to stare at her. "You can't be serious." Lyra slid prone, cloak blending her into the snow. "Primary, 6 by the cave. Secondary, both leaders." "I take them." Guardian Team walks out. The storm howled, rattling the very rocks around them, but Lyra shut it out. She pressed cheek to stock, fingers steady, her crimson rifle alive in her hands. 5 shallow breaths, 1 deep inhale. Stillness. The rifle roared. One enemy dropped before his cigarette hit the snow. Another shot cracked. Second target down. Then a third, a fourth, a fifth. Each time her barrel shifted by fractions, recoil absorbed, corrections instant. The 6th enemy at the cave mouth turned in shock, mouth opening to shout. Lyra's final shot silenced him before a word escaped. 6 shots, 6 kills. Less than 30 seconds. The ridge fell silent except for the blizzard. Marcus's heart hammered. He had seen skilled shooters, even legends in combat, but nothing like this. He almost forgot the cold as he whispered, "That's not human." Lyra didn't answer. She was already swinging her scope higher. Through the swirling snow, the 2 enemy commanders were reacting, radios crackling, searching for the unseen hand cutting down their men. One raised binoculars, scanning desperately. Lyra exhaled, her pendant pressed against the rifle stock. The shot cut through the storm. The first leader collapsed. Before the second could dive for cover, her barrel shifted. Another shot cracked. The second commander pitched backward, lifeless. The ridge was silent now, save for the storm. No return fire, no commands. "Targets neutralized," Lyra reported calmly. "Area clear for extraction." Moments later, the extraction bird thundered overhead, rotors chopping the storm into chaos. Guardian teams staggered from cover, two of them leaning heavily on comrades, blood staining the snow. Among them, Lyra Voss lifted his head, eyes wide as he scanned the ridge. For a brief second, his gaze locked with Lyra's scope, though he couldn't possibly see her through the storm. Still, she whispered under her breath, "I've got you, little brother." Marcus watched her, shaking his head in disbelief. "You saved them. You saved all of them." Lyra's lips barely moved. "That's the job." The climb down was slow, each step sinking deep into snowdrifts, exhaustion pressing heavier than gear. By the time they reached the base, the blizzard had begun to fade, stars piercing through the torn clouds. General Lockhart waited in the freezing air. His voice was clear, carrying authority even through the cold. "Major Voss, flawless execution." Lyra didn't flinch at the title. Major, not lieutenant. The truth was no longer hidden. "Sergeant Hale," Lockhart continued, "commendable support." Marcus straightened, unsure whether to feel pride or humiliation. For the first time in years, he wasn't the man people looked at first. His eyes slid toward Lyra, who stood calm, crimson rifle resting against her shoulder, snow still clinging to her cloak. As the Guardian team was loaded onto the transport, Daniel's stretcher among them, Lyra lingered by the ridge, staring out at the frozen horizon. She touched the red glass pendant, knuckles white. Under her breath, she whispered, "Clara, we did it." The storm carried the name into the night, unheard by the others, but heavy enough to root itself in the snow. Marcus, standing nearby, caught only fragments. He wanted to ask, "Clara? Who was that?" But something in her expression stopped him. Some promises weren't meant to be spoken aloud. The crimson rifle gleamed faintly under the northern lights as the transport lifted into the sky, carrying them away from the ridge. And Marcus knew with certainty nothing in his life would ever feel ordinary again. The transport touched down at Fort Liberty long after midnight. The storm that had raged over the Nevada desert earlier seemed like a distant echo compared to the white hell of Alaska. Soldiers crowded the landing pad, straining for a glimpse of the returning team. The rescued members of Guardian were carried off first, wounded but alive, greeted with urgent hands and whispered prayers. Then came Lyra Voss, crimson rifle slung across her shoulder, cloak still crusted with snow. She moved with the same calm precision as she had that morning, but now every step she took drew silence instead of laughter. At the center of the pad stood General Adrian Lockhart. His silver hair caught the floodlights, his presence carrying a weight that needed no introduction. When Lyra approached, he stepped forward, voice carrying over the wind. "Assessment complete," he declared. "Major Voss, status confirmed." The word major rang across the pad like a gavel striking. Gas rippled through the crowd. She had never been a lieutenant. The smirks, the bets, the jeers, all of it collapsed in that moment under the weight of truth. Marcus Hale felt the sting hardest. Hours ago, he had mocked her, certain of his superiority. Now he realized he had stood beside a ghost, a legend walking among them under a false name. Shame burned in his chest, but it was tempered by something stronger: respect. Later, inside the dim glow of the command tent, Marcus found himself staring at the crimson rifle propped against a bench. It looked otherworldly under the lantern light, gleaming even in shadow. He couldn't stop himself from asking the question that had gnawed at him since the morning. "What does the red really mean?" he asked quietly. Lyra turned. For once, her calm expression softened. She ran her fingers gently along the stock, her gaze distant, as if she were seeing through time. "It means we don't forget," she said softly. Marcus frowned. "Forget what?" Lyra's eyes lowered to the pendant at her neck. She uncurled her fingers, letting the shard of red glass catch the light. "My sister," she whispered. "Lyra Voss. She was my twin. We trained together, dreamed together. She could outshoot me on most days. And when our father passed, she swore we'd carry his lessons further than he ever imagined." Marcus stood silent, sensing the weight of the memory. Lyra's voice steadied, though grief edged each word. "On our first joint deployment, Clara's unit was ambushed. I was too far to reach her. By the time support arrived, it was over. All I found was this." She lifted the pendant, a fragment of her scope, shattered in the blast. I promised that day I'd never let her be forgotten, that I'd carry her aim, her fire, her memory with me. That's why the rifle is red. It's her color, her mark. Every shot I take, she's still there. The tent was silent except for the distant hum of generators. Marcus swallowed hard, unable to find words. He had seen men carry tattoos, medals, scars, but never had he seen someone carry memory itself as a weapon. For the first time in years, Marcus Hale felt the sharp edge of humility. He had measured worth by deployments, scars, and bravado, but Lyra Voss had measured hers in silence, in promises carved deeper than flesh. He straightened, meeting her gaze. "I was wrong about you," he admitted. "About a lot of things." Lyra studied him, then gave a faint nod. "We've all been wrong before. What matters is what we do after." Marcus held her eyes longer, then offered something he hadn't given anyone in a long time. A soldier's salute, crisp and genuine. Lyra hesitated for a fraction of a second, then returned it. In that small gesture, the weight shifted. Marcus no longer looked at her as the woman with the parade gun, but as the sniper who had changed everything he thought he knew. Dawn broke outside the tent, pale light stretching across the desert once more. Soldiers moved about quietly, their eyes lingering on the crimson rifle whenever they passed. Word had already spread of the impossible shot at 5,900 meters, of the storm in Alaska, of Project Helios and the tattoo that proved it real. But beyond the myths and whispers, Lyra Voss's legacy wasn't in classified programs or in records that might never see daylight. It was in something far simpler, far heavier. It was in a promise, one made to Lyra Voss, carried across deserts and blizzards, carved into every breath, every squeeze of the trigger. And though Marcus Hale would never admit it aloud, he knew he had witnessed something that would live longer than any medal or deployment story. As the first rays of sun lit the crimson rifle, he whispered under his breath, almost reverently, "Not forgotten." As Lyra Voss's story closes, we're left with more than just the image of a crimson rifle and a storm-silenced range. We're left with lessons that reach far beyond the battlefield. In America today, it's easy to judge by appearances. A neighbor's clothes, a co-worker's quiet nature, or even a young person who doesn't speak much in class. But this story reminds us, true strength often hides where no one expects it. Lyra's promise to her sister wasn't just about marksmanship, it was about memory, about carrying love and duty forward even when the world moved on. For older generations watching, perhaps it stirs echoes of promises you once made, to family, to country, or to friends long gone. For younger viewers, it's a reminder that discipline and loyalty matter more than noise and recognition. So I ask you, what do you think the red rifle symbolizes in our world today? Is it about family, about sacrifice, or is it a warning not to underestimate the quiet ones around us? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your perspective may inspire someone else who's listening right now. Thank you for spending this time with us, for walking through the storm and silence of Lyra Voss's journey. If you found meaning in this story, if it made you think of promises you've kept or moments when you were underestimated, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Because in the end, stories like these remind us of something simple yet profound. Legacies aren't built by applause. They're built by promises kept.